Welcome to the I5 podcast. I'm Jonathan. I'm here with my co-host Jim.
Hello.
Jim, we're at war with Russia apparently. Not Ukraine, Britain. Britain's at war with Russia apparently.
I mean, yeah, everyone now is angry with Russia. So I guess it's our turn. Time to go to the attic, get the dust off these World War II antique weapons, rifles we may have, and just, march in and take Russia, I guess. Maybe that will fix the economy with whatever damage Brexit did. Who knows?
Yep. I mean, the sad thing is I've been playing Modern Warfare 2 on veteran, so I know how easy it is to get shot. So I'm kind of dreading it.
Well, I thought you were about to say, I know how easy it is to conquer a country.
To be honest, it probably explains why the recruitment levels are so low, because everyone's been playing Modern Warfare and multiplayer and stuff, and they've worked out how easy it is to die.
I've seen the opposite of that, where an actual veteran has been playing Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer, like Warzone, and he applied some of the tactics he learned to the game, and they actually fucking worked, and he was getting frag kills. Anyways, yeah, off topic.
Yep. Just one last thing off topic, like basic strategy. When in doubt, just flank right. Like 9 out of 10 times, that always works.
Yeah.
But we recently had one of our generals basically make a statement which more or less scared the shit out of the nation and scared the shit out of the government, given that it's an election year. Let's just go to the actual statement itself. It's made by General Sir Patrick Sanders, Chief of the General Staff. We will not be immune, and as the pre-war generation, we must similarly prepare, and that is a whole-of-nation undertaking. Ukraine brutally illustrates that regular armies start wars, citizens' armies win them. This was when he made reference to wanting to conscript and bring back mobilization. Firstly, the pre-war generation, that's trying to normalize the idea that World War III is unavoidable, despite most of the population believing it isn't. The majority of the UK population doesn't want war with Russia, and to be honest, they don't want to be in a world war. For most of the population as well, Ukraine is a very unpopular issue, as most want the fighting in it to stop. What do you think on that?
Well, I think that we have enough immigrants, illegal ones especially, that can amount to a small army if we want to take Russia. At least we're going to have them do something useful apart from eating our tax money and residing in hotels, primary schools, or whatever the fuck. Jokes aside, though. Jokes aside.
Yeah.
No one wants war.
That is one of the. That is. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that this statement, I'm not entirely sure 100% what's the reasoning behind it, but I think it's more of a propaganda in order to make Russia shit itself, but Russia doesn't give a fuck, especially not for Britain.
I think it's as well because the MOD wants more funding. But I'll get into that in a bit. I have heard one of the rumors circulating various channels that what they want to do is have a fast track to UK citizenship so they can throw migrants into the army and ship them off to Ukraine. I don't know if there's any truth to that. It's just one of the rumors that's floating around. But when you start talking about conscription, these are the rumors that start floating around. It's not a good topic.
No, it's not, because no one wants to really go and fight a war, especially in this day and age, where you have a certain level of education. Not necessarily education, sorry, I would say a certain level of accessibility in information which didn't exist in the old days. Back in the old days, the government would tell you, especially in remote villages, that the sky is actually green and not blue. And you would believe that the sky is actually green. Also, nowadays, the sense of dying for your country, the sense of pride in the nation and all that. I'm not sure what the exact term is. It's not
patriotism.
Strong. Patriotism. Yes, thank you. So patriotism is not as strong in the newer generations compared to the old ones, and you have pros and cons with that. But because of the lack of patriotism, I don't think people would jump in on the bandwagon to serve the country, to go to war for the country. But the other thing is, in this scenario, it's not about defending; it's more about invading. Because at least the way this statement was given is that we're gonna start the war with Russia, and therefore we as British citizens have an obligation to conscript ourselves to the army to fight this war. Because realistically speaking, I don't see Russia invading the United Kingdom.
No, It absolutely not. I don't think it's feasible in any way or form. And nothing short of the UK getting invaded would justify conscription
And the
in
other
any way or form.
ridiculous thing, another reason why the statement is ridiculous, we have condemned Israel invading Gaza, regardless as to whether this was a response to what Gaza did. We have
Yeah.
condemned Israel invading Gaza, we have condemned Russia invading Ukraine, and now we're on about invading Russia, and somehow this is all right. And
It's also that
especially we funded two wars. Sorry, we funded two wars. Well, not fully, but we sent funds to Ukraine, we sent funds to Gaza. And now what? We ourselves are going to start a third war with Russia, and who the fuck is going to fund us? And why? Like,
they're
it's
trying to
just
build.
preposterous.
They're trying to build this narrative that there's a big standoff between Russia and the rest of the world, and it's like they're in a different bubble because the populations of the countries just don't see it. I think we'll get into this a bit later because I just wanted to finish off with the rest of his statement actually, which is this part which I find to be a gross misrepresentation of what's happening in Ukraine right now, which is Ukraine brutally illustrates the regular army start wars, citizen armies win them. That is that's a lie in relation to what's happening in Ukraine. The civilian armies do not always win wars. The civilian army used by Ukraine has suffered substantial casualties to the point where it's as high as 500,000 now. Soldiers are literally being given 2 weeks of training and then thrown to the front lines as shock troops where they're getting cut to ribbons. It's also gotten to the state where 14-year-olds are being dragged away from their families so that when they go outside, and that's happened on a few occasions now with Ukrainian press gangs, and they're getting sent to the front lines. There's been a terrifying story of someone with learning disabilities getting sent to the front lines. There was all kinds of video footage of other Ukrainian soldiers messing with him before he was killed.
Ну, диви, кого на мене підлізували, блядь. Ану. Вох! Що там, малий?
Чергую.
А де твій автомат?
Не дали ще, сказали в бою.
А, чуєш, а то як його? Москалів їбашить будеш?
Москалів.
Ваха, вихід! Вихід, блядь! Що, Воха, будеш з міномета бачити?
А росте?
Додамо. Давай, ходім туди. Ходім. Давай. Швидше, блядь. Інвалід ебаний, сука. Що, все?
Все вже.
Ага. Дай малому шмальнуть разок.
Кому?
Да.
Його бачу.
Нормально. Ну, дай разочок.
Та ми закінчили вже стрільбу.
Та одну.
Одну.
Одну міну, хай пульне,
одна
блядь.
залишилась.
Питав, блядь. Давай.
Обережно, блядь. Блядь, ти що?
Ёбаный в рот, Воха!
Отсюда, блядь.
Ебать, иди нахуй ведь сюда, долбоёб! Казал умеет, блядь! Пидорюга, иди нахуй, блядь! Ой, сука, обещалась хуйня ёбана снова! Блядь, такая! Иди нахуй, блядь! Сука такая, блядь! Ох и пидорюга, блядь! Иди, сука, нахуй, блядь! Чмо ёбаное, блядь!
In combat, and the average age of conscription has now gone up to 43 in Ukraine.
Can I say something as well? Meanwhile,
Yeah.
while all of that is happening, this is an unconfirmed, it's a rumor, but I think it's worth mentioning. There is already a search, so to say, like in terms of where Zelensky should be go after the war. So not a search, but people are investigating ideas as to where they would send him. And by people, I mean people high up in the European Union and possibly America.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they'll want to use him as a propaganda piece if Ukraine falls, because this will be a big loss for NATO. They'll want to use him as propaganda of it'll be your country next. So he's probably already looking on how to get out. There's also a lot of internal problems as well within the Ukrainian army, with having just fired. They're on the verge, if not already, getting rid of Zelensky. But just to say as well, the Ukrainian army is not winning in Ukraine right now. They're on the verge of losing Avdiivka. The Russians have already circled them in, and the Ukrainians are pulling out.
Yeah.
So-
on the back of that, I also would like to say is that there's been a new interview with Putin.
Tucker
with,
Carlson.
Yeah, I think we should maybe comment on that and analyze it maybe on another episode, because
Oh, definitely.
there's a lot of
So-
stuff in there that I think it's worth discussing.
I just haven't had time to watch it yet.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. But yeah,
Oh yeah, definitely. I was just going to say as well. Thirdly, what's wrong with that statement? What's winning the war in Ukraine for Russia right now is overwhelming artillery and
Yeah.
precision and indirect fire with precision from other sources. That's what's doing substantial. That's what's causing substantial casualties.
Mhm.
I mean, you need infantry to take ground, but right now the MVPs of both the Ukrainian and the Russian army are their artillery and indirect fire units, things like airstrikes and all kinds.
Yeah,
So
we also need. Sorry, go on.
No, no, I was just going to say, so I think this statement is a disgusting misrepresentation of what's actually going on.
Oh yeah, I agree. Especially if we also count what sort of help was sent to Ukraine.
Mm.
Like we see billions and billions being thrown down the drain. It's not one of these problems that you can just throw more money at it and it will just solve itself. So at this point, I think whatever money we send to Ukraine, it's more like money laundering rather than actually aiding. The other thing I would like to say is all the different stuff we sent to Ukraine in terms of like anti-air rockets, tanks, chips, like equipment, basically any sort of military equipment. It's some of it was barely usable. I know that for a fact because I've been watching the news, especially on the Greek side as well. Some of the stuff we sent were old in the 80s. We're talking about anti-air cannons that require two people to operate, one to aim and one to pull the trigger. Like
Yeah.
really, really old stuff. Now, the reason why I know this is because it was a big fuss from the opposition saying that we sent all this equipment to Ukraine and would leave our country defenseless, which I can sort of understand, but at the same time, this equipment has been so out of date, you wouldn't be able to hit a pigeon with it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yet, we sent this equipment there. Now, whether it will be any useful or whether it will even arrive to destination, because you also have the drone strikes which prevent sometimes the equipment to arrive in Ukraine in one piece or at all. I don't know, but we were instructed to send this stuff over there. But the thing is, apart from sending equipment, if you don't have the personnel to operate or even train them on how to operate, because if you send the same weapon even twice, if these two weapons are 2 generations apart or even 3 generations, they work
Yeah.
differently, so you need different training. Who's
Mhm.
providing this training?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big factor.
Unless they use ChatGPT or Google to see how to operate these weapons, I don't see them being effective at all.
If I had a javelin once in Modern Warfare, I'm sure I could work it in real life.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
was just
it's ridiculous.
yeah.
The thing that pisses me off is, especially in our country here in Britain,
Mm.
it's like a money drain of money. We
Yeah.
complain about high taxes and the NHS and not pretty much every single fucking public service which crumbles because of lack of funding, like the
Yeah.
councils as well. And at the same time, we send billions to this war, which is already gone. And we shouldn't even getting involved to begin with, just in the fear because we're next. I mean, calm the fuck on.
To be honest, I highly doubt that the UK government and military thinks it's going to be next. I think a lot of people are going to be making a lot of money out of this. Which, to be
Realistically,
honest,
Russia doesn't even have any reason to think coming and conquering UK.
I mean, one of the what has to be said as well is before Russia invaded Ukraine, there are reports that NATO was putting listening posts and intelligence bases in Ukraine, which would have provoked the Russians.
Oh, I can see a lot of reasons Russia invading Ukraine, but I was talking like Russia has no reason to invade the UK.
Oh no, no, that's what I mean. I was just saying NATO has been provoking the Russians as well in their
Oh
own
yeah,
way.
yeah. I agree.
I mean they've just surrounded them with NATO states effectively with the inclusion of Finland. I mean, I can understand, and I was going to go into this. I can understand why Finland wants to be in NATO. It's necessary for its survival. They are
No,
in
it's
this region.
not. If Finland, if it's not, if Finland, if Finland joins NATO, it's going to be a mistake,
It's
because
already in.
Finland. Oh, Oh
Yes,
shit!
it's literally just joined.
Oh no!
I do think it's going to be a mistake for NATO if Finland gets invaded and we have to go in. But realistically, I don't think Russia's going to touch Finland. It's got a
Why
hell of
the
a
fuck
defense
would they join?
because they feel they need the survival of seeing what's happened to Ukraine and
More
the history.
obligations of protection than joining NATO. Did they not see what happened to Ukraine?
Ukraine hasn't joined NATO yet.
Even worse.
Yeah, this
Even
is the
worse.
thing that I know. It's this is the thing. I mean, we'll get into this a bit later, but that's why the Finnish did it. They say from their perspective that joining NATO was essential to their survival, but they also have a hell of a defensive line with I've forgotten the amount of artillery guns. It's something like 300 or something. It's a ridiculous amount of artillery they have on their defensive lines. The Russians wouldn't really invade them; it would be so costly. But the Finnish are in a different situation to the UK. You know, it's in there, and I was just going to say as well, it's in Finnish interests and Ukrainian interests to bring as many militaries into this area of the world as possible to defend the region, specifically more Ukraine than Finland, though. And that's why Ukraine will be all for this. But we're also hearing as well that Ukraine, Finland, Norway are the last line of defense to prevent Putin from invading the rest of Europe. I've not seen any evidence that he wants to invade the rest of Europe. A lot
It's
of the
like
build
shooting is like the new AIDS Hitler, the way they portray him. I mean, Jesus.
A lot of the buildup is around Ukraine and the Baltic states, and there's some around Poland. So it's
Mm.
more regional disputes than it is global and geopolitical disputes. This is one of the things where this area of the world, Eastern Europe, it has a complex history, and to be quite honest, NATO micromanagement is going to make things worse, and it does run the risk of turning any kind of NATO micromanagement in this region, like we're seeing in Ukraine. It is running the risk of turning it into a global war. I mean, there's already been a situation where it was suspected that a British missile may have shot down a Russian plane, and the Ukrainians are already demanding that they can use that they be able to use NATO weaponry to strike into Russia. And luckily, the Americans are still saying no.
Yeah.
But I just want to quickly say why, just before we go into this analysis, I want to say why I think the general has said this. Basically, this guy is due to step down in 6 months.
Okay.
And it's the timing of this is not coincidental. He has done this to scare the UK government because it's before the election, and the UK government seems to have silenced the media from talking about conscription directly. I think it's also because of the amount of cuts in military investment by the government in both spending and getting rid of units, e.g., Boris Johnson getting rid of a few military units and replacing them with a smaller Rangers unit. Basically, the MOD is the Ministry of Defence is sick of Tory fuck ups in management and procurement. There have been resignations over the cuts before. So, for example, the former head of the British Army basically resigned at one point a few years ago over this after a politician basically said that a naval officer could do his job. After that, said general slammed UK military spending cutbacks.
Mm.
So there have been fallouts between the MOD officers and the Tories over this. Obviously, military chiefs in countries like Norway are also saying similar things. Again, countries with small militaries where they don't have big budgets. It could also be the scaremonger for support for Ukraine, as a lot of the population just aren't buying this World War III narrative. They're not buying this 1939 feel to the world. And like I said, the timing is very troublesome for the current government as they're going to have an election later this year. That they're already staring defeat in the face. They don't want to be associated with a party killer policy like this, or at least they don't want it mentioned in public before the election. There has been pressure from the Americans, and the government wants. There has been pressure from the Americans to expand the British military, and the government wants to posture in NATO war games and make pretend it's a military superpower by sending small groups of ships and planes while the Americans send out larger forces. But I was just going to say as well, just to get it out there, it does need to be said that there are differences between civilian reserves, national service, and conscriptions. But for the UK, conscription in a war isn't so much going to be national defense. It's going to be sending people out to foreign countries to die for them. And
Yeah.
I don't know, that's not going to go down well with the
No.
public.
Especially if it doesn't, if it reaches that point, then it's going to be the most pretentious campaign ever seen.
Yeah.
Like you condemn Russia, you condemn Israel, you condemn all this type of shite, and you talk about wokeness and all that kind of stuff, and then you give a pass to a campaign that promotes us starting a war, which is exactly what you condemned in all the previous scenario. It's just no. I really struggle to see this happening. I don't
What?
think it will pass on.
No, and the government has reacted to it. Basically, Rishi Sunak's spokesman said that the government has no intention of introducing conscription. The British military has a proud tradition of being a voluntary force. There are no plans to change that. He also added, engaging in hypothetical wars was not helpful.
Mm.
There was one thing I also wanted to say as well, in case people are thinking, oh, conscription will raise the strength of the British Army by sheer numbers. It won't, because they won't be volunteers. The determination to succeed won't be there. You won't get the quality of soldier that you will get from a volunteer. Again, Ukraine had quite large numbers of troops, and we saw how ineffective it was at times. So conscription alone doesn't just automatic conscription does not provide you with quality of troops that you would get from a smaller army of volunteers, where you can spend time training them. So it's also the fact that conscription could be a liability. So, for example, you have, for example, I can imagine that getting out of the army for mental health problems, PTSD, and stuff would be just as hard as getting kicked. So the British Army
Yeah.
could be a potential war crime waiting to happen, because you would have troops forced to fight who would clearly have mental illnesses, mental health problems. But the actual private companies that do those kinds of health checks would just pass them as fit for service anyway, and you would be turning
Because
them
they
loose
need to
on
tick
populations.
the numbers.
Yeah, and they have their own targets. It's also the fact that there's a risk that you could have a fifth column in the army. Let's face it, I'll go into this a bit later, but the Tories are pretty fucking hated in the UK, and I don't think the Tories want to arm the population. I don't think they want them to have any kind of training.
Yeah, train them, arm them, and then that will give them will give us at least, a reason to take arms if the government does something stupid, which, to be honest, they do quite often. And then they wouldn't like that, would they? Would they?
This is going to be the last section before we get into the analysis of like what we were talking about earlier.
Just one small comment in general. Like, if you want to build an army, ideally you want to focus on quality instead of quantity.
Yeah, and that's
So having 200k of ill-trained individuals that possibly have mental issues and they don't want to be there is significantly worse than having, like, I don't know, 20k of properly trained soldiers.
The problem is that the armies went down from 120,000 to 72,000, and I can say that there seem to be two causes of this. The first one is recruitment and retention. I know that's two things, but I've lumped them together because they have the same problems which are causing both of those outcomes. And the second one is procurement of vehicles and equipment and things. So, for example, of course, this is Britain, and the Tories outsourced recruitment to a private company called Capita. They privatize everything. It's just what they do to make money out of it. And Capita have been completely ineffective at launching any kind of recruitment campaign. They've got a £495 million contract, and they do bear some responsibility in destroying the recruitment drive. Just a few things I'll read out, and then I'll let you react to them. They've been responsible, for example, for slow application process and poor housing for the troops. Specifically, the applications for the military, for those who actually want to join, have become way too complicated, and many potential recruits just give up. Additionally, from first stage application, like going on the website, it takes 400 days to get to basic training with the waiting lists. In the French Foreign Legion, you are in basic within 24 hours of signing up. These online applications also are incredibly complex for what they are, and there's no human support. So they take too long to complete, and they're too complicated for some people wanting to join the army. So of course it's going to be hard to meet the quota when you've made the application process so hostile. This is the second part. It's also been suggested that Capita are rejecting white men's applications in favor of diversity quotas set up by the government. I mean, the RAF certainly had a scandal where there were 160 white men who were rejected in favor of women from ethnic backgrounds who were less qualified. So, you've got two fronts there. One, there's a genuine flaw with the actual recruitment process. It's too long-winded and complicated. And the second is that they seem to be selecting the type of people they want instead of just taking anyone who wants to join and seeing if they can do it based on merit. That's always going to drive recruitment numbers down.
Yeah. What I'm going to say is that, ironically, all these quotas that were made to combat racism actually result in racism.
Yeah.
Like, the definition of being racist is basically profiling people not based on their skills, but based on their racial background. And this is exactly what's happening in what you said about
outcome.
Yeah, they were rejecting 160 white people that were more qualified just to meet the quotas, which is like, oh my god, I would run for hours for that, so I won't do it. The other thing I want to mention is this is definitely a symptom of budget mismanagement.
Oh yeah.
Because even creating foolproof functional system that will allow you to do an application, that also requires money. So the budget itself for the army, apart from being responsible for housing the troops, maintaining equipment and all that, pay for the generals, the soldiers and whatnot, it also involves the admin side of things, which is the system that handles the applications and any sort of clerks or support for these applications, which is non-existent. So yeah, if you don't have that in place, of course, as you said, it's natural that you would fall down in numbers. So it's not this again. It's not one of the problems that you need to throw more money in it, and to fix it, you need to focus on doing the basics. So the very basic thing is, okay, first of all, make the platform usable.
Yeah.
Provide support.
Yep.
Second of all, diversity quotas. It's 2024. Can we
Yeah.
just apply
kills
common
everything.
sense and get away from this stupid shit? I'm sick of it. It's everywhere, and I'm sick of it. Because
It's
you have all these quotas, you have all this training about diversity and whatnot, but everything boils down into have common sense and don't be a dick.
yeah.
That's all it is.
It's also the fact as well. You have a civilian company recruiting for the army when the army itself it used to get the 9,000 recruits a year that it needed because it was okay. It was actually quite decent at recruiting. All aspects of the military were. As soon as this company came in, the recruits went down from 9,000 to something like 5,700 a year. And in combination with the really low retention rate, like I said, this company just does not know what it's doing. This is also to do with troop management, again, on the retention part. So there are also inclusions, there are what are called inclusion officers attached to regiments to enforce diversity culture, that they're effectively a political commissar akin to those that were in the Red Army. Also, just as what we were saying as well, to do with all this woke diversity bullshit, there are poster signs that are in the bunks saying that, and this is a crucial point, saying that people who are proud of British history, wave Union Jacks, etc., in the British Army are racist and need to be identified so they can be reported. And people like that, who say these things, aren't being accepted into the army in the first place. Not only is this habit of preventing people from joining with inadequate online bureaucracy, but reported this is a woke agenda, or a diversity agenda rather. I hate the word woke. A diversity agenda appealing to a minority of the population, chasing away both the veterans who would stay and the potential recruits who would want to join. The people who like waving Union Jacks around and are proud of British history, they're the ones you want to join the British Army because they're the ones that have the mentality to go and fight for the country. In addition, I hate to say this, but nasty people make very good soldiers because they're willing to go and fight wars.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is good at something, and every single person has, pros and cons. But it's quite funny you mention about people waving the Union Jack being deemed racist and should be reported. What about the people who wave the Black Lives Matter flags or the Pride flags? I'm pretty sure they're okay with these people, aren't they?
Yeah, it's also the fact as well that you wear a fucking Union Jack on your shoulder when you are in the army.
No, we shouldn't have that. Just turn into a rainbow.
Yeah.
Rainbows everywhere.
It's like NATO requirement. You literally have your national flag on your
actually,
shoulder.
Since now is you have the Israel versus Gaza,
Hamas.
you might as well, Hamas, yeah. You might as well have the Palestinian flag as well after the rainbow flag, just to indicate your support. Yeah, fuck it. Have all the army dress up with the colors of Palestine. Why not? It's all for the sake of inclusivity, isn't it? Also, for the sake of inclusivity, why would you go to war with Russia? Shouldn't be more inclusive and just let them in?
I mean, by that logic, yeah. I would like to say though as well, just as a quick point, because we'll get to that we'll get to this in the last part. Because I just want to finish off this part, but you've got Russia doing what it's doing in Ukraine right now, in that area of the world. NATO is also just as guilty as starting a world war with what they're allowing Israel to do.
Well, yeah,
I mean, that's spiraling, and what they're doing to the Palestinians is a bloody genocide.
it is.
So,
It really
um,
is.
so NATO's just as bad here. But yeah, I just wanted to go into that, and that's why, they're not retaining the veterans. The veterans just want to get out as soon as possible. They don't want to renew their contracts.
Yeah,
And a lot
because
of
when
veterans,
you include all this diversity shite, they just want to get out because that's bullshit.
yeah,
They find it
and
ridiculous, and it is ridiculous.
yep. As also for recruitment as well, and this is an obvious one, the Tories have not really created an environment where people want to volunteer to serve and risk their lives for them. It would just be making them rich for arms companies in Ukraine and things like that. Economically, I mean, think about it. Economically, living conditions have become so bad: food banks, homelessness, an inadequate police force, a benefit system that punishes people who are disabled, the cost of living crisis, to name a few things, has really made the population hate the Tories right now. Not to mention,
Yeah.
you've got all the Tory corruption, legacy media with the conflicts of interest, what's becoming a forever war in Ukraine. That
Corruption?
seems to.
There's no corruption. There is no war in Basing Se, for anyone who has watched the Avatar. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and it's definitely the
Yeah.
case. And it only gets worse, really.
Mm.
It only
And
gets
that,
worse.
like I was saying, I'm not surprised people don't want to go fight for them. I mean, can you imagine? People would just get the training and probably go AWOL with their fucking rifle. I'm not condoning that; it would be a nightmare scenario, but I don't think the government wants to risk it.
Can I
Add to
go
that is
back
what?
to what I said about patriotism being a bit absent in the newer generations? One of the reasons why this happens is because you're feeling a bit helpless when you see the government that you voted, or even worse, the government that you didn't vote, mishandling every single aspect of their job, which results in the country slowly crumbling.
Yeah,
And when you see that, and because of that, you see your own standards going to shit, or even
yeah,
worse, the living standards of the people you love going to shit, then
hmm
when they ask you to give their life for them, because it's not for the country really, it's for them, you're like, you took everything from me and now you want my life as well? Fuck off, go fight your own
yeah.
war. With the money you made from all these years by,
Mm.
fraud.
Like I
That's
said, it's
also
also
one reason why patriotism is.
mm.
Uh,
it's also
I want to say, like, I'm Greek and I find it quite difficult to feel proud for my country with what I've been seeing lately, because everyone is proud of their history, but everyone seems to forget that the history is written every single day. Right
yeah,
now, we are writing history with what we're doing and how we act. And
yeah,
I personally am not proud with what's happening, not in Greece, but
no,
in the world in general. I
mm,
think we're living in new dark ages.
yeah. It's dark ages in terms of morality, but the illumination of information through things like the internet
Oh
is
yeah,
making
but
people
if you
really
don't
aware.
have the
It's an odd one, really.
yeah, because it's exactly what you said. You have the privilege and access to information, but if you're not
Mm.
able to filter, process,
No, that's
and use
true.
that information, then it's pretty much useless.
It does seem like people though really are starting to just open their eyes to what's going on in Ukraine and how wrong it is, really, and just wanting a ceasefire as more information gets out. I mean, look at Tucker Carlson right now. He has a bigger following than most of the legacy media in the UK combined.
I didn't think much of him, but I started watching the interview with
Mm.
Putin, and I say at least for that interview, she's doing a pretty good job.
Yeah,
But I haven't been. I'll say that I haven't been following him at all, so I don't know. I know
well,
almost nothing of the backstory and what he did before. So
well, remember that Tucker Carlson has already admitted that he's told lies most of his career.
yeah, which is not surprising because he's a
Yeah,
journalist who was also quite close to the government. But
yeah.
this interview, I think, was quite well structured. I haven't
Mm.
seen the whole of it yet.
I need to watch it as well.
I'm around halfway there,
Mm.
but ignoring what he did, that interview specifically
Mm.
seems to be all right. And
Um,
I would be
yep.
curious because I'm just going to say that this thing. There's a lot of people that now demanding him to interview Zelensky as well.
Yeah,
It's going to be interesting if that happens, but I don't see that happening because as much as
Zelensky will not do
Zelensky,
it.
yeah, as much as Zelensky likes touring the world, pleading and begging for money, he wouldn't want to be put in a corner like that.
NATO and the US will tell him not to do it, but
Yeah.
Biden will tell him not to do it.
Not Biden specifically, but people.
Well, yeah, he can't even remember the name of Hamas. The people who tell Biden what to do will tell
Yes,
Zelensky not
yeah.
to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But just one thing I'd like to finish off this point with as well. This ties into what we were saying earlier. There's not really the apparatus or structures in place to mobilize or conscript the British population. It would most likely be outsourced to a private company, which worked out so well for the railways. But I don't think it's beneath, as we were saying, I don't think it's beneath the government to exploit the population in this way and make money from it. Because remember, if you're going to mobilize and conscript the population, you've got to have bureaucracies put in place to organize it. You've got to have more things built to house them. You've got to have more uniforms produced. You've got to have more equipment produced. You've got to have more training facilities produced. So it's a lot of money for people who get those contracts. And both the generals and the military staff, as well as the government politicians, will make money from that.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. Just to move on to the second reason as well, which will be a quick one. Procurement. There's a major failure in procurement. We have a drastic shortage of equipment and a history of failed projects that just ended up being a waste of money, like the fucking Ajax armored vehicle project. For example, the Ajax armored vehicle, which cost over £5 billion and were found to be inadequate for use. I mean, that they used to cause nausea for the crew, and the actual firing would damage the soldiers' eardrums, and at one point it couldn't fire while moving. And it couldn't actually its actual frame couldn't handle a heavy gun, which was a nightmare for an APC. It couldn't handle an autocannon, so the thing was just bloody useless. I mean, the MOD are saying it's going to come back into service in 2025, but that's a hell of a delay from when they started it. So that was £5 billion down the drain. Add to that, there's been the recent case of two minesweepers crashing into each other. We only had 3 of these vessels. 2 of them have crashed into each other because apparently the captain didn't know the difference between accelerate and reverse. So both of them have been taken out. So the Navy's lost some of its capability because it just does not have the ships to replace them. Ships have been mothballed because there isn't the personnel to operate them, again, stemming from actual recruitment problems. A Guardian article. Britain's Army, Navy, and Air Force will all be cut back over this Parliament, despite promises being made by Boris Johnson during his election not to be cutting the armed services in any form. A 5-year defence review published on Monday confirms the Army target size will be cut by 9,500 to 72,000 by 2025, its lowest level since 1714, towards the end of the War of the Spanish Succession. That actually has gone on to happen. The Army has been lowered to that amount. And add to this as well, you were going on about missing money. There's a £17 billion black hole in the military spending budget. So there's been a lot of mismanagement. There's not only troop management issues in the actual British Army, there's mismanagement overall in terms of the procurement. I mean, mismanagement is synonymous with the Tories at this point. But the UK has, for example, drastic ammunition shortages. It only has enough ammo to sustain a war effort for a couple of days. So a lot of the problems with the British military, it's not so much conscription that's the solution here. It's fix the recruitment and retention issues and fix the procurement issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's a general issue.
Mm.
It sort of makes a cycle, really.
Mm.
But I don't see this being fixed because they
No,
don't want it to be fixed.
No, the Tories don't want to spend the money. I have heard Tobias Ellwood wanting to get defence spending from 2% to 2.5%. Basically, he's in the 1922 committee, and he will make money from any kind of defence spending. He will have shares in these arms companies. He's one of the political generals. There are British generals who will go from being in the British Army to be on the board of directors at, say, Raytheon or some other arms company. So there is that political link between the private firms and the British military. It does go on. So it is in their personal financial interest to have higher defense spending, and they want it from 2% to 2.5, so they can buy a few more tanks, a few more vehicles, a few more pieces of equipment. I think all of this conscription talk is just a scaremonger. I don't really think it's worth going into the culture war aspect of this. You've basically had, I think all I'm willing to say is there's been a few commentators who have gone on saying, "Oh yeah, conscript the wokeoids, have them learn some discipline." And some veterans have rightly said, "Hold on, you are talking about sending people who disagree with you to go off and fight a war that's for a country that's not their own and potentially die. Why don't you go sign up and do it?" And then the culture warrior will normally just say, "Oh, well, I like what I'm doing here." And I think that is bad form. wanting conscription and just going on. I mean, they won't be believing what they're saying. They're just getting paid to go on TV and say something controversial or outlandish to get views. But I do think that kind of sentiment needs to stop, because you are talking about sending people off to war and getting killed just because they disagree with you.
Yeah.
But at the same time as well, this diversity of the army, the enemy's not going to care about your feelings.
No, it won't.
That's the other thing I would say. A bullet and a shell doesn't care about how you feel.
That's why it goes back to having these diversity quotas and wokeness. Like in the middle of war, no one's gonna be like, "Oh, this army has like 5% black, 2% identified, and 6% of the LGBTQ. That's a very well formed army. You know what, guys? Let's cancel the war. Let's everyone go home and let them do their own thing over there, and everyone will be like." No one thinks like that.
No, it's why it should be based on
infuriating.
merit. No matter
It's
what skin color you
infuriating.
have, no matter what you identify as, if you can do the job, you can do the job.
Yeah,
That's what the military should care about.
that's what everyone should care about, really.
Do you remember the phrase in the U.S. military was "There's no skin color in the army. There's only the color green," because that was the color of the uniform.
And you know what? That's the epitome of being inclusive, because you treat everyone equally. Sorry.
Yeah, it's.
But
I remember that. I remember it in Full Spectrum Warrior. There's only one color in the U.S. Army: green, even though they were in desert camouflage.
yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. There is so much stuff going wrong that
I mean that.
where do you even fucking start? But the thing is,
Well,
they don't even want to start.
yeah.
Now, you mentioned they're going to increase the military spending by 2.5%. Rather than
I don't
fixing
think they
this,
are. I don't think they are. That's just what the MOD wants.
yeah, but rather than doing that
Mm.
properly, they're going to find some obscure, stupid, weird way, borderline illegal, definitely immoral, to cook up the
Mm.
numbers so that it seems that they increase the spending when they
Mm.
actually haven't.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah.
Even if they just improve the financial management of what they were already spending, that would probably help out a lot. But moving on really to the last part, which was what we were talking about earlier, the geopolitical area, I honestly think what's happening here is it's not a 1939 feel. What we're seeing is regional and geopolitical conflicts in different areas of the world. But to talk about Russia, I think what's scaring the shit out of NATO, because the intervention in Ukraine, giving them support and stuff, that has been very half-assed. It's been very haphazard, the way they transferred weapons over, transferred equipment over. It's not entirely NATO's fault, but at the same time, some of what they've been giving NATO, it hasn't been very well structured. It's basically we'll give them tanks for the first 6 months, then eventually we'll give them planes. We'll let them do counter-offensives without adequate air support, without adequate artillery. So the intervention hasn't been that well thought out. It makes NATO look rather incompetent. But I know that's a bit of a judgment. But the point I want to make is, I think what's happened here is NATO thought that they would just win by just sending over weapons, and what NATO is staring at here is a tactical defeat at the hands of the Russians in Ukraine. And what makes this even worse is that there were peace talks last year, and both Boris Johnson and Joe Biden sank them to keep the war going because so many arms companies were making money out of it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
war is an investment at this point.
yeah, but I think what NATO have underestimated is that Russia does have the capacity to win in Ukraine, and it's looking like it might happen. And I think NATO is getting pretty scared because that's a massive propaganda loss for them.
Yeah, and it will also mean that NATO can do fuck all.
Mm-hmm.
Which in reality, it can do fuck all.
Mm. Do you know, one thing I just wanted to say as well, Donald Trump. Do you know he actually suggested in one of his speeches that he would have America leave NATO?
No.
I don't know if he would actually do it, but he said it and verbalized it.
I mean, it's Trump. He always
He'll
says
say
stuff.
he'll say things for shock value, but it did scare the British government, even though I don't think he would do it.
Nah.
But like I said, I personally don't feel what's going on in Eastern Europe around Ukraine and places like that. I don't think it's gonna. I think it's in danger of spilling into Western Europe only because of NATO's intervention.
Yeah.
I don't think on its own it would have spilled into Western Europe. I don't think what's happening in Ukraine is worth World War III.
No,
I,
no,
d-
it's
I
not.
don't condone Russia's invasion,
If
but
No, me neither. But if World War III starts, it won't be due to Russia and Ukraine. It will be due to whatever happens in the Middle East and
yeah,
whatever
that's
comes out of that.
yeah.
Because really, we have 3 or 4 different wars in the Middle East
Mm.
alone. It's not just Israel.
Mm.
It's other stuff around it as well as Israel.
Yeah, because you've got the UAE and their hatred of Iran, and also you've got Saudi Arabia with Lebanon and stuff, and Yemen and places like that. Yemen, sorry.
Exactly.
So you've got multi conflicts. I think NATO has I think NATO's really getting scared because they don't realize what they've with not having those peace settlements last year in Ukraine. They don't realize the kind of worms they've opened because they've normalized war again.
Yeah.
And what's happened in Israel, it's spilling out. And the problem with Israel was it wasn't de-escalated quickly enough, and the fires just spread. And now the US is trying to de-escalate things by doing airstrikes to get control of the Red Sea again. And the airstrikes aren't going to work. That's a different podcast, mind. But just going back, I don't think we are in World War III. I think there's more danger of World War III happening in relation to Israel, but the General Sanders' remarks aren't in reference to what's happening in the Middle East. It's in reference to war with Russia. And I don't think that war with Russia is very feasible. And I don't understand why people on Talk TV are saying we're at war with Russia, we're at war with Russia. It just seems like the UK is warmongering, quite frankly.
Fucking hell, we're not at war with Russia. And
No, we're
who's
not.
we
Ukraine
anyways?
is.
Who the fuck is we? Jesus.
Yeah, the government. The
Oh.
government might declare war on them, but the British population doesn't want it. Even the government doesn't want it right now. Remember, this is one big thing as well, right? Russia has nukes. It has been a long time since there has been a war against a country directly that has nukes. That's what people seem to be forgetting. There's a proxy war going on in what is effectively what could be what I was hoping would just be a flashpoint conflict in Ukraine. But if we were to have a world war with Russia, both America, Britain, all of NATO, a lot of NATO countries have nuclear weapons, as does Russia. The reason why you should not want a 1939 in this day and age, the reason why you should not want a world war, is because if someone's on the verge of losing in that world war, they might put their finger on the button.
Yeah.
And
And then everyone's losing.
Yeah. And the thing is, conscription would be a bad move for NATO. Mobilization would be a bad move for NATO because the Russians would interpret that as an aggressive action. That was one of the reasons why in America, the US government during Vietnam went for the draft system over mobilization because they were scared that the Russians would see it as an act of war, as a military buildup. So you've got to be very careful when you start mobilizing your population, and you've got to be careful when you start conscripting them, not just for the domestic consequences, but also how the international community might see it. But I can't see it happening in the UK. The apparatus isn't there. The will to do it isn't there, I hope. And I do personally think it's just the MOD wanting more money. And they're trying to scare the UK government into doing it. Because the whole nature of this is how weak the armies become, this would be the only way to fix it.
Mm.
But I don't really have much to add on that. Is there anything else you want to say?
Not really. I think we covered it all.
Cool. I hope you guys found that one useful. Jim and I thought we would just give our 2 cents on it. Again, we were the hosts. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit that trinity of the like, share, and subscribe, and also ring the little bell as well. It really helps the channel out a lot. Bye, guys. We might see you in the war.
Bye. Yeah.